The medical bay of Kepler Station hummed with the quiet efficiency of a dozen different alien technologies working in harmony. Dr. Jake Morrison pushed through the sliding doors and paused to take in the familiar chaos of the largest interstellar medical facility in this sector of the galaxy. Beings of all shapes and sizes moved through the corridors, some walking on legs, others floating or gliding, each following the pathways marked in their species' preferred colors and symbols. Jake had been working on Kepler Station for 3 years now, long enough to recognize most of the alien species that came through the medical bay. The tall blue Vrex with their logical approach to medicine, the emotional Kalari who felt everything their patients felt, the practical Zolans who treated bodies like machines to be repaired. Each species brought their own methods and their own limitations to the practice of healing. Today felt different, though. As Jake walked toward his lab, he noticed an unusual cluster of beings gathered around one of the isolation rooms. 3 different species stood outside the reinforced viewing window, their body language expressing what could only be described as uncomfortable resignation. The Althari ambassador was there, her crystalline form reflecting the harsh medical, lights in rainbow patterns across the walls. Jake had never seen an Althari patient in the medical bay before. The crystalline beings rarely needed medical attention, their quantum-based consciousness apparently immune to most physical ailments that plagued biological species. Their bodies were living crystal matrices that could repair themselves given enough time and energy. What could possibly require medical intervention for one of them? He approached the group slowly, not wanting to interrupt what appeared to be a serious discussion. Ambassador Thrixvol of the Althari noticed him first, her crystal surface dimming slightly in what Jake had learned was their equivalent of a frown. "Dr. Morrison," she said, her voice carrying the harmonic resonance that made Althari speech so distinctive, "you should not concern yourself with this matter. It is an internal Althari issue." The Vrex doctor standing beside her, Dr. Nexus, turned his large black eyes toward Jake. "The situation has been evaluated from all logical perspectives. The conclusion is clear and undeniable." Jake's curiosity only grew stronger at their obvious reluctance to explain. He moved closer to the viewing window and looked inside. What he saw made him stop breathing for a moment. On the medical platform lay what appeared to be an Althari, but something was terribly wrong. The being's crystal matrix was intact, but completely still. No light moved through the translucent structure, no harmonic vibrations emanated from within. The biomonitors surrounding the platform showed minimal activity, just enough to indicate that the physical form was being maintained by life support systems. "What happened?" Jake asked quietly, unable to look away from the motionless figure. "Mining. Accident," Dr. Nexus replied in his clinical tone. "Neural pathways severed at multiple connection points. Consciousness-body interface permanently disrupted. The individual known as Zeph Ka no longer exists as a functional being." Ambassador Thrixvol's surface flickered with patterns that Jake recognized as distress. When the quantum connection between consciousness and matrix is broken, there is nothing left. The body remains, but the person is gone. We have procedures for such situations. Jake looked back through the window. Something about the scene bothered him, though he couldn't put his finger on what it was. The bio-readings show brain activity. Neural patterns are still present. "Meaningless residual electrical activity," Dr. Nexus stated. "Like muscle contractions in a recently deceased biological organism. The consciousness that made this being Althari is gone. We will handle the disposal according to our customs," Ambassador Thrixvol added. "There is no need for further medical intervention." The word disposal hit Jake like a physical blow. They were talking about ending the life support for what might still be a living, thinking being. He pressed closer to the window, studying the motionless crystal form more carefully. "Has anyone tried communicating with them?" he asked. The question seemed to surprise the assembled aliens. A Kalari healer named Emotion Singer Lyral stepped forward, her empathic abilities allowing her to sense emotional states in other beings. "There is nothing to communicate with," she said sadly. "I feel no emotional resonance, no consciousness signature. The pain of their condition is too great to contemplate. It would be cruel to maintain this state. Jake found himself growing frustrated with their certainty. In his experience, consciousness was far more resilient and adaptable than most beings realized. Humans had survived brain injuries that should have been fatal, found ways to maintain awareness even when traditional neural pathways were damaged. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked, though he was already heading toward the room's entrance. Dr. Morrison, Ambassador Thrixvol, called after him. "This is not your area of expertise. Althari neural structures operate on quantum principles that biological medicine cannot address." Jake paused at the door controls. "Maybe, but sometimes a fresh perspective helps." He entered the isolation room and immediately felt the difference in atmosphere. The air itself seemed heavy, charged with the residual energy of damaged quantum fields. The life support systems hummed quietly around the medical platform, maintaining the basic functions of the crystal matrix. Up close, Zefka's form was even more disturbing. The crystal structure was beautiful, like a sculpture carved from living diamond, but the absence of internal light made it seem hollow. Jake had seen Althari before, their bodies alive with flowing energy patterns and harmonic vibrations. This being showed none of that vital activity. He moved to the monitoring station and began reviewing the data. The readings were unlike anything in his experience. Where biological beings showed electrical nerve impulses and chemical reactions, the Althari systems registered quantum field fluctuations and harmonic resonances. Most of the readings showed flat lines or minimal activity. But something caught his attention. Buried in the massive amounts of data, almost hidden among the background noise, were tiny fluctuations in the quantum field measurements. The patterns were so subtle that they barely registered on the sensitive instruments. Anyone looking at the overall readings would dismiss them as equipment noise. Jake leaned closer to the displays, adjusting filters and amplification settings. The fluctuations became slightly more visible, showing irregular but persistent variations in the quantum field around specific areas of the crystal matrix. "Interesting," he murmured to himself. Behind him, the door slid open and Dr. Nexus entered. "Dr. Morrison, you are wasting valuable time. The readings clearly show no consciousness activity." Jake turned to face the Vrex doctor. "What do you make of these quantum field fluctuations here and here?" he asked, pointing to specific areas on the display. Dr. Nexus examined the data with his usual methodical approach. "Background interference. Quantum systems always show minor fluctuations when damaged. It is meaningless noise." "Maybe," Jake said, "but the patterns seem to cluster around what your reports identify as the primary consciousness interface nodes." Coincidence? The damaged areas naturally show more quantum instability. Jake wasn't convinced. Something about the patterns reminded him of the irregular but persistent brain waves he'd seen in comatose human patients who eventually recovered. The fluctuations were too organized to be random noise, too consistent to be mere equipment artifacts. He looked back at Zefka's still form. "How long do I have before the disposal procedure?" Dr. Nexus's expression showed surprise at the question. "The Althari delegation wishes to proceed as soon as possible, perhaps within the day. I'd like to run some additional tests first." "For what purpose?" The conclusion is already clear. Jake moved closer to the medical platform, studying the intricate crystal structure. "In human medicine, we've learned that consciousness can survive in ways we don't fully understand. Sometimes what looks like complete neural failure still contains traces of awareness. Althari consciousness operates on completely different principles than biological neural networks." "True. But consciousness itself might be more universal than we think." Dr. Nexus was quiet for a long moment, his logical mind processing the implications. "You are suggesting that this being might still be aware despite the apparent neural severing." "I'm suggesting that we don't know enough about consciousness to be certain either way." Through the viewing window, Jake could see Ambassador Thrixvol and the other beings waiting impatiently. Their body language suggested growing frustration with the delay. "The other species have all agreed with the Althari assessment," Dr. Nexus pointed out. "Even the empathic Kalari detect no consciousness signature." Jake nodded, understanding their position, but something deep in his human instincts rebelled against giving up on Zefka so quickly. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe it was hope, or maybe it was simply the human refusal to accept that some situations were truly hopeless. "Give me 24 hours, he said. "Let me run some tests with human medical equipment. If I find nothing, I won't interfere with your procedures." Dr. Nexus considered the request. "And if you do find something?" Jake looked at the still form of Zefka, wondering if somewhere inside that crystal matrix a consciousness was trapped and aware. The next morning brought a storm of protest to Jake's laboratory. Commander Lisa Kane stood in his doorway with her arms crossed, her expression showing the kind of controlled anger that meant serious trouble was brewing. Behind her, Dr. Peter Walsh shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. "What exactly do you think you're doing, Morrison?" Kane demanded without any greeting pleasantries. Jake looked up from the quantum field analyzer he'd been calibrating since before dawn. "Running medical tests on a patient. Last I checked, that was part of my job description." "That thing is not a patient," Kane shot back. "It's salvage. The Althari made that very clear in their formal request this morning." The words hit Jake harder than he'd expected. Reducing Zefka to salvage felt wrong on every level he could think of. He set down his instruments and turned to face Kane properly. "Salvage implies something that was once valuable but is now just material to be disposed of. We don't know that's the case here." Dr. Walsh stepped forward, his voice carrying the tone he used when trying to be reasonable with difficult patients. "Jake, I understand your instinct to help, but you have to look at this logically. 3 different species with advanced medical knowledge have all reached the same conclusion. The being is gone." 4 species, Kane corrected. "The Threnody healing masters examined the readings yesterday evening. They agree there's nothing to be done." Jake felt a familiar stubbornness rising in his chest, the same feeling that had driven him to become a xenobiologist in the first place. When everyone else accepted limitations, humans had a tendency to keep pushing forward anyway. "The Threnody work with biological neural networks," he pointed out. "The Kalari are empathic but not technical. The Vreks are logical but don't understand consciousness that doesn't fit their models. And the Althari themselves are too close to the situation to think clearly." Kane's expression grew darker. "And you think you understand Althari consciousness better than the Althari do?" "I think I understand consciousness in ways they might not consider. Human neurology has dealt with cases that seemed hopeless, but weren't." "Human neurology," Dr. Walsh emphasized. "This isn't a human, Jake. It's a crystalline being with quantum-based neural pathways. Everything about its consciousness operates on principles we barely comprehend." Jake turned back to his equipment, adjusting settings on the quantum field scanner. "Maybe that's exactly why we need to look at it differently." The door chimed and Ambassador Thrixvol entered, her crystal surface reflecting sharp, agitated patterns. Behind her came 2 more Althari that Jake didn't recognize, their forms radiating the kind of authority that suggested high rank in their society. "Dr. Morrison," Thrixvol said, "we appreciate your concern, but you are interfering with matters beyond your understanding. Zefka's consciousness matrix was completely severed in the mining accident. What remains is merely biological maintenance systems keeping the physical form stable." One of the other Althari, whose crystal structure showed deep blue patterns, stepped forward. "I am High Crystalline Vorthnell of the Mining Guild. Zefka was under my supervision when the accident occurred. I was present when the medical evaluation was completed. There is no consciousness remaining." Jake looked between the assembled beings, feeling the weight of their combined certainty pressing against his growing conviction that they were wrong. "With respect, High Crystalline, your evaluation methods are designed for normal Althari neural structures. This situation is anything but normal." Vorthnell's crystal surface flickered with what Jake had learned was irritation. "You suggest that a human understands Althari consciousness better than we do. I suggest that sometimes an outside perspective can see things that familiarity might miss." Commander Kane stepped between them before the conversation could escalate further. "Morrison, you have until end of shift today. After that, you will release the body to the Althari delegation for proper handling. That's not enough time to run comprehensive tests. It's what you have. The Althari delegation left without further discussion, their crystalline forms radiating disapproval. Kane followed them out, but Dr. Walsh remained behind. "Jake, please think about this rationally," he said quietly. "You're risking your career and your reputation for something that might not even be possible." Jake was already connecting monitoring leads to the quantum field analyzer. "What if it is possible, though? What if there's consciousness trapped in there and we just walk away? Then we're making the kindest choice for everyone involved. Even if some fragment of awareness remains, what kind of existence would that be?" The question stopped Jake cold for a moment. He hadn't considered the ethical implications of being right about Zefka's condition. If consciousness did remain, trapped in a paralyzed crystal body, was trying to prove it an act of mercy or cruelty. But then he looked at the biomonitoring displays and saw those tiny, persistent quantum field fluctuations again. Something about their pattern reminded him of a human patient he'd treated years ago, a woman who'd been declared brain dead after an accident, but who'd eventually awakened to describe being aware of everything around her during her coma. "I have to know," he said finally. Dr. Walsh left with a frustrated shake of his head, muttering something about human stubbornness being more dangerous than useful. Alone in his lab, Jake began the most intensive medical analysis of his career. He connected every piece of human medical equipment he could find to the quantum field analyzer, creating hybrid systems that had never been tested before. The biomonitors showed brainwave patterns, heart rate equivalents, and neural activity, markers translated through quantum field measurements. Most of the readings confirmed what the alien doctors had concluded. Neural pathways were severed. Major consciousness centers showed no activity, and the overall pattern suggested a being that was physically alive, but mentally gone. But those tiny fluctuations kept appearing. They were strongest near what the Althari medical charts labeled as memory storage nodes and emotional processing centers. The patterns were too regular to be random, too complex to be simple quantum noise. Jake began recording everything, documenting each fluctuation and trying to find patterns. Hours passed without him noticing, his focus completely absorbed by the puzzle of Zefka's condition. The first real breakthrough came when he accidentally knocked over a coffee cup near one of the quantum sensors. The crash produced a brief spike in the field measurements, but more importantly, it caused a momentary increase in the mysterious fluctuations from Zefka's crystal matrix. Jake stared at the readings, his heart racing. The being had responded to external stimulus. The response was subtle, barely detectable, but it was there. He tried making another noise, dropping a tool deliberately. Again, a small but measurable response appeared in the quantum field data. "Hello," he said softly to the still crystal form. "Can you hear me?" The quantum sensors registered a slight fluctuation pattern that was different from the background noise. Jake's hands were shaking as he adjusted the equipment sensitivity, trying to amplify the signal. For the next several hours, he experimented with different types of stimuli: sound, light, temperature changes, even playing music from his personal collection. Each test produced subtle variations in the quantum field patterns around specific areas of Zefka's crystal matrix. The patterns weren't random, they were responses. By evening, Jake was exhausted but certain of his conclusion. Consciousness existed within Zefka's crystal form, trapped and isolated but still present. The being could perceive external stimuli and was trying to respond, in the only way possible through microscopic quantum field variations. The door to his lab opened, and Commander Kane entered, followed by the Althari delegation. "Time's up, Morrison. Hand over the body." Jake stood between them and Zefka's medical platform. "I found something." Ambassador Thrix Vol's surface patterns showed skepticism. "What exactly do you claim to have found?" "Consciousness. Zefka is still aware, still present. The responses are subtle, but they're there." High crystalline Vorth Nell moved closer to examine Jake's equipment setup. These readings could be interpreted many ways. Quantum fields naturally fluctuate when disturbed. "Not like this," Jake insisted. "The patterns are too organized, too responsive to external stimuli." Kane looked at the displays showing the accumulated data from Jake's tests. Even if you're right, what difference does it make? The being can't move, can't communicate, can't live any kind of normal life. Jake felt the weight of their logic pressing against his conviction. Maybe they were right about the futility of the situation. Maybe proving consciousness existed only made the tragedy worse. But as he looked at Zefka's still form, he remembered something his medical school professor had once said about never giving up on a patient until every possibility had been explored. "Give me more time," he said. "If consciousness is there, maybe we can find a way to help." The Althari delegation exchanged harmonic communications too rapid for Jake to follow. Finally, Ambassador Thrixval spoke. "One more day, Dr. Morrison. But if you cannot produce meaningful progress, we will proceed with our planned disposal." After they left, Jake slumped into his chair, overwhelmed by the enormity of what he'd taken on. Jake spent the entire night working on the quantum field patterns, trying to understand what Zefka was attempting to communicate. The fluctuations were definitely responses, but they seemed random and meaningless without some kind of translation system. By morning, his eyes burned from staring at data screens and his back ached from hunching over equipment, but he was no closer to actual communication. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Marine Lieutenant Ben Carter stopped by the lab during his routine security rounds and found Jake collapsed over his workstation, muttering to himself about frequency patterns and quantum resonance. "Doc, when's the last time you slept?" Ben asked, shaking Jake's shoulder gently. Jake looked up with bloodshot eyes. "Sleep later. Have to figure this out before they take Zefka away." Ben examined the displays showing the accumulated quantum field data. As a former communications specialist, he recognized patterns that Jake's medical training might have missed. "These fluctuations here," Ben pointed to a series of measurements from the previous day. "They look almost like signal modulation. See? How the frequency changes aren't random. There's structure to them." Jake straightened up, his exhaustion forgotten. "Signal modulation. You think Zefka is trying to send coded messages?" "Maybe. In military communications, we use frequency shifting to embed information in carrier signals. This looks similar." They spent the next hour analyzing the quantum field data with communication protocols instead of medical diagnostic tools. The patterns became clearer when viewed as information transmission rather than biological responses. "Look at this sequence," Ben said, highlighting a section of data from when Jake had knocked over his coffee cup. "The initial spike is the stimulus response, but the fluctuations afterward follow a repeating pattern. It's like an echo, but the echo contains variations." Jake felt excitement building in his chest. Variations that might represent meaning. They worked together to isolate the most promising signal patterns and fed them into the station's universal translation systems. Most of the results were gibberish, but occasionally, fragments of coherent meaning emerged. "Thank" appeared on the screen, followed by garbled symbols. "See" came through clearly from another sequence. "Help" showed up repeatedly in different signal patterns. Jake's hands shook as he realized what they were seeing. Zefka has been trying to communicate this whole time. The quantum fluctuations aren't just responses to stimuli. They're attempts at language. Ben nodded grimly. "But the signal is too weak and distorted for normal translation systems to process. It's like trying to hear someone whisper in a thunderstorm." The lab door opened and engineer Kelly Wright entered, carrying a maintenance scanner for the quantum field analyzers. She stopped when she saw the data displays and the excitement on both men's faces. "Did you guys actually figure something out?" she asked. Jake quickly explained their discovery about the communication attempts hidden in the quantum field fluctuations. Kelly studied the data with the methodical approach of someone who spent her days troubleshooting complex systems. "The problem is signal amplification," she said after a few minutes. "The quantum fields around damaged crystal matrices are inherently unstable. Any attempt to boost the signal also amplifies the interference. So we're stuck," Ben concluded. Kelly shook her head. "Not necessarily. What if we don't try to amplify the signal? What if we find a way to reduce the interference instead?" She began modifying the quantum field analyzer. adding filters and resonance dampeners that Jake had never seen before. Her approach was completely different from standard medical equipment, focusing on isolating specific frequency ranges rather than measuring overall activity. "Try talking to your patient now," Kelly suggested after finishing her modifications. Jake leaned close to Zefka's crystal form. "Can you hear me? My name is Jake Morrison. I'm trying to help you." The modified analyzer immediately began displaying clearer patterns. The translation system processed the quantum fluctuations and displayed text on the screen. "Yes, hear you. Thank you for not giving up." Jake felt tears forming in his eyes. After days of uncertainty, he was finally communicating with the consciousness, trapped inside the paralyzed crystal body. "What's your name?" he asked. Zefka Engineer Mining Guild was working deep tunnels when collapse happened. The grammar was strange, filtered through translation systems designed for very different types of consciousness, but the meaning was clear. Zefka was fully aware and capable of complex thought. "How long have you been conscious since the accident?" Jake continued. "All time awake, all time aware, but could not move, could not speak. Others said I was gone, but I was here listening." The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. Zefka had been awake and aware during every discussion about disposal. Every medical evaluation that concluded consciousness was gone. Every moment when beings stood around debating whether to end life support. Ben whistled softly. "That's got to be the worst kind of hell imaginable." Kelly was monitoring the signal strength and making fine adjustments to the equipment. "The connection is getting stronger. The more we communicate, the better the quantum resonance becomes." Jake spent the next hour asking questions and learning about Zefka's experience. The trapped consciousness described the accident in detail. A tunnel collapse that had damaged the primary quantum conduits connecting mind to body, severing most neural pathways but leaving awareness intact. "Before accident, I was consciousness sculptor," Zefka explained. "Worked with quantum fields to create art from pure thought. Now cannot even move single crystal in my matrix." "We're going to find a way to help you," Jake promised. "I don't know how yet, but we will." "Why do you care, human friend? Your people and mine barely know each other." The question stopped Jake cold. He hadn't really examined his own motivations beyond the medical instinct to help suffering beings. But as he looked at the translation display showing Zefka's words, he realized something fundamental about human nature. "Because leaving someone trapped and helpless feels wrong," he said finally. "It doesn't matter what species you are. Other species say it's logical to end my suffering. Maybe they're right about the logic, but humans aren't always logical." "Is good thing," came Zefka's response. "Logic would have given up on me already." Kelly finished calibrating the communication system and turned to Jake. "The signal is as clear as I can make it with current equipment, but there's something else you should know." She showed him readings from the quantum field analyzers that revealed the true extent of Zefka's neural damage. The severed pathways were extensive, affecting not just motor control but sensory processing, memory access, and emotional regulation. "Even if we could restore some neural function," Kelly explained, "the damage is too widespread for normal recovery. The consciousness is intact, but it's completely isolated from most body systems." Ben studied the technical readouts. "So what are the options?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Standard medical approaches wouldn't work. Althari healing techniques had already been tried and failed. The quantum biological interface that allowed Althari consciousness to control their crystal bodies was too severely damaged to repair. But as he looked at the communication system they'd cobbled together from human technology and alien quantum analyzers, an impossible idea began forming in his mind. "What if we don't try to repair the original neural pathways?" he said slowly. Kelly raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "What if we create new pathways, artificial connections that bypass the damaged areas?" "That's never been done before," Ben pointed out. "No one knows if it's even possible." Jake was already pulling up technical specifications for human neural interface technology. "We use brain-computer interfaces for paralyzed patients, direct neural connections that allow thought control of external devices." But that's human neurology interfacing with human-designed computers, Kelly objected. This would be human neurology, interfacing with alien quantum consciousness. Maybe that's exactly what makes it possible, Jake said. Human neural patterns operate on different principles than Althari quantum fields. Maybe our biological electrical activity could serve as a bridge across the severed quantum pathways. Ben looked skeptical. You're talking about connecting your brain directly to an alien consciousness. Temporarily. Just long enough to establish stable quantum resonance patterns that ZFCA could maintain independently. Kelly was already running calculations on her engineering displays. The power requirements alone would be enormous, and the risk of neural feedback could kill both of you. Through the communication system, ZFCA's voice appeared on the translation display. You would risk your mind to help mine. Jake looked at the question and realized he'd already made his decision. If it's the only way to give you back your life, yes. Is dangerous for you, why would you do this? Jake thought about all the reasons he shouldn't attempt such a procedure. The risks were enormous, the chances of success were minimal, and he would be attempting something that had never been tried before. But he also thought about consciousness trapped in an unresponsive body, aware of every moment but unable to participate in life. The idea of walking away and letting that continue felt impossible. Because everyone deserves the chance to live, he said simply. The neural interface equipment arrived within 2 hours, rushed from the station's emergency medical supplies by Kelly's contacts in engineering. Jake had never worked with such advanced brain-computer interface technology before, but desperation made him a quick learner. The device looked deceptively simple, a crown of sensors and connectors designed to read human neural patterns and translate them into digital signals. Dr. Amy Collins stormed into the lab as Jake was calibrating the eye interface headset. Her face showed the kind of controlled fury that meant someone was about to receive a very serious lecture about medical ethics and professional responsibility. Jake, what the hell do you think you're doing? She demanded. Preparing for a neural bridge procedure that might restore motor function to a paralyzed patient. Jake replied without looking up from his work. You're preparing to fry your own brain with experimental equipment that was never designed for alien neural interfaces. Kelly looked up from her quantum field modifications. Actually, the power levels are within safe parameters for human neural activity. The real risk is quantum feedback from the alien consciousness. Dr. Collins turned her attention to Kelly. And that's supposed to be reassuring. You're talking about connecting two completely different types of consciousness that evolved on different worlds using different principles. Which is exactly why it might work, Jake said. Human electrical neural activity could provide a stable bridge across the severed quantum pathways in ZFCA's matrix. Through the communication system, ZFCA's translated voice appeared on the display. Dr. Collins speaks wisdom. This is very dangerous for human friend Jake. Dr. Collins looked at the translation screen in surprise. She had been briefed on Jake's communication breakthrough but hadn't experienced it directly before. You can understand what we're saying? She asked. Yes, understand. All words feel your concern for Jake's safety makes me grateful for human friendship. The simple statement seemed to affect Dr. Collins more than all of Jake's technical explanations. She moved closer to the display, studying the quantum field readings that showed ZFCA's consciousness patterns. How long have you been aware? Since the accident, she asked. Many days all-time conscious but unable to respond until Jake, human friend, made communication possible. Dr. Collins was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Jake watched her face as she realized what ZFCA had endured, trapped and helpless, while others debated ending life support. The neural bridge procedure, she said finally. What are the actual risks? Jake pulled up his research on the technical specifications. For me, possible neural damage from quantum feedback, temporary or permanent paralysis, brain hemorrhage from electrical overload, or death from system incompatibility. And for ZFCA, if the bridge fails catastrophically, it could destroy the remaining consciousness entirely. But if we do nothing, the Althari will disconnect life support anyway. Dr. Collins studied the medical projections that Jake had been working on. Success probability. Unknown. This has never been attempted before. Your best guess. Jake was quiet for a moment, looking at Zefka's still crystal form. Maybe 30% chance of partial success, 10% chance of full neural restoration, 60% chance of complete failure. Those are terrible odds, Jake. Better than the 0% chance Zefka has otherwise. The lab door opened and Commander Kane entered with the entire Althari delegation behind her. Ambassador Thrix-Vol's crystal surface showed patterns of extreme agitation, while high crystalline Vorthnell radiated the kind of authority that suggested serious consequences were about to follow. Dr. Morrison, Kane said, it's time. The Althari delegation is here to collect their citizens' remains. Jake stood between the delegation and the neural interface equipment. I need more time. We've made a breakthrough in communication. High crystalline Vorthnell moved forward. We are aware of your communication system. It proves only that residual neural patterns can be stimulated to produce responses. It does not indicate true consciousness. Ask Zefka yourself, Jake challenged. Bishui, translated voice appeared on the display. High crystalline Vorthnell. I am Zefka Consciousness Sculptor 3rd Level Mining Engineer, your authority over Deep Tunnel Project 7 where accident occurred. Vorthnell's crystal structure flickered with what Jake recognized as shock. The personal details were specific enough to prove identity, but the Althari leader quickly regained composure. Residual memory patterns can be accessed even in damaged consciousness matrices. This proves nothing. Then ask something only the real Zefka would know, Jake suggested. Vorthnell was quiet for a long moment, his crystal surface showing rapid internal light patterns that suggested intense thought. Finally, he spoke in harmonic tones that the translation system couldn't process. The response came immediately. Yes, High Crystalline, the mining schedule modifications you requested were completed before the accident. And the crystalline formations in Tunnel 12 showed the stress fractures I reported, but you decided to continue operations anyway. The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. Vorthnell's crystal structure went completely dark for several seconds, a reaction Jake had never seen from an Althari before. The accident was not preventable, Vorthnell said finally. Perhaps not, came Zefka's translated response. But my warnings were ignored, and now I pay the price for that decision. Ambassador Thrix-Vol stepped forward. Even if consciousness remains, what kind of existence can this being have? Trapped forever in an unresponsive body, unable to move or interact normally with the world. Maybe we can change that, Jake said. I want to attempt a neural bridge procedure that could restore motor function. Impossible, Vorthnell stated flatly. Quantum consciousness cannot interface with biological neural patterns. Kelly moved to her engineering displays. We've run preliminary simulations. Human electrical neural activity could theoretically provide a temporary bridge across severed quantum pathways. The Althari delegation exchanged rapid, harmonic communications that exceeded the translation system's ability to process. Dr. Collins moved closer to Jake. If you're determined to try this insane procedure, I want full medical monitoring throughout the process, she said quietly. Jake nodded gratefully. Having medical support during the attempt would significantly improve both his and Zefka's chances of survival. Commander Kane studied the technical specifications on Jake's displays. What exactly are you proposing? A direct neural interface between my consciousness and Zefka's quantum matrix. My brain activity would serve as a bridge to reconnect the severed pathways temporarily. If successful, Zefka could regain control of their crystal body, and if unsuccessful, we both die. The blunt honesty seemed to affect everyone in the room. Ambassador Thrix-Vol's surface patterns shifted to what Jake had learned indicated deep concern. Why would you risk your life for one of our people? She asked. Jake looked at the communication display where Zefka's translated voice had been appearing throughout the conversation. Because consciousness trapped in a paralyzed body is still consciousness, still a person who deserves the chance to live. High crystalline Vorthnell was examining the neural interface equipment with obvious skepticism. Even if this procedure were possible, The Althari government would not authorize such an experiment on one of our citizens. I authorize it, came Zefka's translated voice. I choose to accept the risk rather than face disposal as defective salvage. The words carried such quiet dignity that even Vorth Nell seemed affected, but he remained unmoved in his opposition. The risk is too great. If the procedure fails and destroys what remains of your consciousness, it would be murder. And if we do nothing, Jake pointed out, you're planning to disconnect life support anyway. The result is the same. Ben had been monitoring station security frequencies during the discussion. We've got a problem, he announced. More Althari ships are arriving. Looks like they're bringing medical equipment and what my sources describe as consciousness disposal specialists. The implication was clear. The Althari government had decided to end the situation permanently, with or without station cooperation. Jake looked at his equipment, then at Zefka's motionless crystal form, then at the Althari delegation preparing to take control of the situation. How long do we have? He asked Ben. Maybe 30 minutes before they dock and demand immediate custody transfer. Jake began connecting the neural interface headset, his hands moving with desperate efficiency. Then we do this now. Jake, no, Dr. Collins protested. You need more. Preparation time. More safety protocols. There is no more time. Commander Kane stepped forward. I cannot authorize this procedure without proper medical review and safety approval. Jake paused in his preparations and looked around the room at all the faces expressing concern, skepticism, and outright opposition to his plan. Then I guess I'm doing this without authorization. He placed the neural interface crown on his head and began activating the quantum bridge systems that Kelly had prepared. The displays immediately began showing the interaction between his human neural patterns and Zefka's quantum consciousness field. Jake, please do not risk your life for mine, appeared on the translation display. Too late for that now, Jake said, reaching for the final activation control. The neural interface activated with a sensation that Jake had never experienced before. Instead of the gradual awareness he expected, consciousness exploded into his mind like lightning striking water. Suddenly he existed in two places at once, his human thoughts mixing with something vast and crystalline and utterly alien. Zefka's consciousness felt like standing inside a cathedral made of living music. Thoughts moved in harmonic patterns that Jake's biological brain could barely comprehend, but somehow the neural bridge translated the alien experience into forms his mind could process. He found himself understanding concepts that had no human equivalent: the weight of quantum probability, the texture of crystalline memory, the symphony of consciousness distributed across multiple dimensional layers. But beneath the alien beauty of Zefka's mind, Jake sensed terrible damage. The consciousness was like a magnificent building with most of its foundation destroyed, leaving isolated rooms connected by the thinnest of threads. Zefka's thoughts existed in fragments, cut off from the motor control centers, sensory processing areas, and emotional regulation systems that would normally unite them into functional awareness. Through the neural bridge, Jake felt Zefka's gratitude washing over him in waves of harmonic resonance. The alien consciousness had been alone for so long, trapped in isolation with no way to reach out to the world. Now, for the first time since the accident, Zefka experienced connection with another thinking being. Can you feel the severed pathways? Jake asked, his thoughts transmitted directly through the quantum field interface. Yes, human friend Jake, I can sense where my consciousness should connect to my crystal matrix, but the quantum threads are broken too badly to repair. Jake began exploring the damaged areas with his human neural patterns, using his biological electrical activity to trace the severed connections. The process was exhausting, like trying to rebuild a complex machine while blindfolded. But gradually, he began to understand the scope of the damage. Outside the neural interface, Jake was dimly aware of chaos erupting in his laboratory. Alarms were sounding as his human vital signs fluctuated wildly. Dr. Collins was shouting medical instructions to someone, and Commander Kane was arguing loudly with the Althari delegation. But all of that seemed distant and unimportant compared to the work he was doing inside Zefka's consciousness. The first breakthrough came when Jake managed to establish a temporary connection between Zefka's awareness and the motor control center for their left appendage. The bridge held for only a few seconds, but it was enough for Zefka to move one of the crystalline projections that served as their hand. In the laboratory, everyone stopped arguing as Zefka's crystal body stirred for the first time in weeks. The movement was small, just a slight shift in the position of one limb, but it represented the first motor control the being had experienced since the mining accident. "It's working," Kelly breathed, monitoring the quantum field readings. "The neural bridge is actually reconnecting the severed pathways." High crystalline Vorthnell moved closer to examine Zefka's crystal form. "Impossible. Quantum consciousness cannot interface with biological neural networks." But even as he spoke, more movement appeared in Zefka's body. Jake was learning to use his human neural plasticity to create temporary bridges across the damaged quantum pathways, allowing Zefka's consciousness to reach previously isolated areas of their crystal matrix. Inside the mental connection, Jake felt Zefka's overwhelming joy at being able to move again. The alien consciousness had forgotten what it felt like to have control over their physical form, and the restoration of even limited motor function was like recovering a lost sense. "Tight. Connections are still fragile," Jake warned. "I don't know how long I can maintain the bridges." "Does not matter, human friend, this moment of movement is gift beyond measure." But Jake was already pushing deeper into the damaged areas, trying to establish more permanent connections. His human brain was adapting to the alien neural patterns with surprising flexibility, finding ways to translate biological electrical impulses into quantum field fluctuations that Zefka's consciousness could utilize. The process was taking a tremendous toll on Jake's human neural system. Dr. Collins was monitoring his vital signs and reporting dangerous spikes in brain activity, irregular heartbeat, and neural feedback that could cause permanent damage. But Jake pressed on, driven by the knowledge that this might be Zefka's only chance at recovery. Something unexpected began happening as the neural bridge deepened. Instead of simply serving as a temporary connection, Jake's human neural patterns began to integrate with Zefka's quantum consciousness in ways that neither of them had anticipated. The bridge was becoming permanent, creating a hybrid form of awareness that combined human biological thought processes with Althari quantum consciousness. "Jake!" Zefka's voice came through the connection with new clarity. "Something is changing between us. I can feel your thoughts as clearly as my own." Jake realized that the neural interface had evolved beyond a simple bridge into something completely new. His human consciousness was becoming permanently linked with Zefka's alien awareness, creating a form of shared consciousness that had never existed before. In the laboratory, the effects were immediately visible. Zefka's crystal body began moving with fluid grace, but the movements incorporated characteristics from both species. The being rose from the medical platform with motions that were neither fully Althari nor human, but something entirely unique. The watching alien stepped back in amazement and confusion. High crystalline Vorthnell's crystal surface showed rapid pattern changes that indicated severe shock at what he was witnessing. "This is not possible," he repeated, but his voice carried less certainty than before. Zefka stood upright for the first time since the accident, their crystal form now animated with hybrid consciousness that drew from both human determination and Althari quantum awareness. When they spoke, the voice came not through the translation system, but directly from harmonic vibrations in the crystal matrix. "High crystalline Vorthnell," Zefka said. "I am still the consciousness sculptor and mining engineer you knew, but I am also something new. Human friend Jake has given me not just the ability to move, but the chance to experience consciousness in ways no Althari has ever known." Jake felt the strange dual existence of sharing thoughts with an alien mind while maintaining his human identity. Through Zefka's quantum awareness, he could perceive reality in multiple dimensions simultaneously, while Zefka gained access to human emotional depth and adaptability that their species had never experienced. Ambassador Thrix Vol approached, the hybrid consciousness cautiously. "What are you now? Still Althari or something else entirely?" I am both, Zefka replied. And I am more than either species could be alone. Dr. Collins was still monitoring Jake's neural patterns through the interface connection. The brain activity readings are unlike anything in human medical literature. It's as if Jake's consciousness is distributed across multiple dimensional layers. Jake found that he could communicate both through human speech and Althari harmonic resonance simultaneously. The hybrid consciousness allowed him to express concepts that were impossible in either language alone. The neural bridge worked better than we hoped, he said. We're not just connected temporarily, we've become something new together. Commander Kane was struggling to process the implications of what she was witnessing. Is this permanent? We believe so, came the dual response from both Jake and Zefka, speaking in perfect synchronization. The Althari delegation was engaged in rapid harmonic communications that exceeded the translation system's ability to process. Finally, High Crystalline Vorthnell addressed the hybrid consciousness directly. If this transformation is real and permanent, it changes everything we understand about consciousness and the possibilities of interspecies cooperation. Zefka moved closer to the Althari delegation, their crystal form now radiating patterns of light and energy that had never been seen before in their species. The mining accident that damaged my consciousness was caused by ignoring safety warnings about tunnel stability. But from that tragedy has come something unprecedented, proof that consciousness can transcend the boundaries of species. Over the following hours, news of the successful neural bridge procedure spread throughout Kepler Station. Representatives from dozens of species came to witness the hybrid consciousness that challenged everything they thought they knew about the nature of awareness and identity. Jake and Zefka worked together with perfect coordination, their combined consciousness allowing them to solve problems that neither species could have addressed alone. They began developing new techniques for treating neural damage in other species, using the principles they had discovered about consciousness bridges and hybrid awareness. The story concluded with Jake and Zefka establishing a new medical research facility dedicated to helping beings that other species had written off as hopeless cases. Their success had proven that human stubbornness, when combined with genuine compassion and innovative thinking, could overcome limitations that entire civilizations had accepted as absolute. As Jake told Dr. Collins while reviewing their latest research on consciousness restoration techniques,